Richard, you wrote the foreword to Jason's book. You talk about how you met Jason nearly 20 years ago on a random Necker Island celebration. That 1 week vacation turned into Jason co-founding a film production company, producing movies like Limitless and a dozen other hit films, as well as the highly regarded music festivals. We all know that you have an eye for entrepreneurs. And Jason told me the story of how you asked him to get on a table. His legs are shaking in front of all these very successful, famous entrepreneurs. And to tell everybody, Jason, just tell them who you are and what you do. What impressed you at that time in just a few minutes of meeting somebody?
Well, he was somebody who was willing to listen as well as somebody who was willing to entertain. So, it wasn't just all about himself. He was very much somebody who would be, if he was asked a question, he would always bring it back to the other person and say, well, what's happening in your life? He was obviously fun, and I would say he's definitely outward going and obviously creative. And I think those are all attributes which are really worth looking for.
Nothing that Richard said is actually taught at MBA in a business school. It's interesting to me. What are some of the things that, looking back on, you think Richard saw in you as this potential leader who was going to be the youngest person, other than Richard himself, to run a Virgin brand? What do you think he spotted in you, and what have you learned in these last 20 years from Richard as a mentor?
It was by osmosis, really. I don't think Richard realized that he was a mentor to me. I think that, he likely saw something and allowed me and trusted me to go on and go build this business. And then I think the ability and the desire and the sort of notion of taking risks, he taught me that taking risks was okay, and failing and falling down was okay, and just get back up. I had some falls. It was a roller coaster, but it was like, get back up. He really is the entrepreneur's entrepreneur.
I think we just got a masterclass in mentorship, Richard.
I nearly called my first book, Losing My Virginity, talking ahead of myself. And I think, Jason could have called his book Talking Ahead of Himself, because I think when you're setting off to create anything, you have to sort of talk ahead of yourself and then try to catch up with what you said. I think I remember asking Jason, whether he could run something, and Jason's response, "Oh yes, I certainly can do that." And then he had to go and learn the art of running it. And I think any good entrepreneur is either guilty of that. We try to say yes to everything, and then run to make that a reality.
Jason, you brought up an important point, and I know that this is something that Richard has written in his blogs and his books. Insatiable curiosity. Again, not something taught in business school. And yet every successful entrepreneur, every successful leader I've ever met has read more books than I have, even though I read a lot of books, or they have learned some really interesting principles. They're still taking classes. They're constantly in learning mode. This idea of continuous learning to be a successful founder, inventor, or innovator. Can we speak on that? I'll hear from both of you, Richard and then Jason.
For instance, we have so many fascinating people come to Necker, CEO conferences and charitable conferences and, YPO conferences and all sorts of interesting people. And, I love talking to all the guests on one-to-one, because I'm learning all the time from them. And the more that you learn, the more useful you can be. And there are so many problems in this world. And I spend a lot of my time seeing if I can make a slight difference to some of them.
Jason, you too, you're insatiably curious. We know that your book and through your time with Richard. Is that something that's innate, or do you learn it? Do you pick it up every once in a while from a mentor like Richard?
In this instance, I picked it up from Richard. I'm going to be completely clear. I was always, prior to meeting Richard, I was like every other, 20-year-old, right? I was glued to my phone, and I was sort of, I never landed in a city and was sort of looking out the window. I was never asking questions. I wasn't really admittedly present in a room. You know, I would go to these cocktail parties, or I'd go to these big dinners, or I'd go to these events, and I wasn't really present. I wasn't really dialed into the conversation with the individual that I was sitting with. I was always in my phone, or sort of my mind was somewhere else. And I think Richard really taught me the art of being present and giving your undivided attention to the individual or the group that you're with. And through that process, you learn, you know, and you're asking the questions. I'll never forget a trip to the White House where Richard and I got the opportunity to go, and prior to arriving, Richard was meant to go off to lunch with Barack Obama at the time, and he hands me this sheet in the hallway of the hotel on the way to the White House, and he said, "Here, this is for you." He had prepared notes for me, so I was studied and was was abreast of the 9 topics that were on the list of what was going on, and what was, how were we impacted as Virgin businesses, how were the communities and the organizations that we were tied to at the time, and then how the general, what was going on generally in the U.S. He's, and Richard, you're very well known for, taking constant notes and just always digging
Jason,
in.
is that true? So is that true? He's known for it. Did you see it?
He is, yes. He's always got a notebook and a pen or pencil in his hand, and he's always taking complete notes. I mean, just jotting down he's probably taking notes right now. He's going to go get it. Yeah. Yes. He's going to go. I've got my notebook. He taught me to do it. And I take notes constantly. But, Richard taught me to take notes. And I, when I'm meeting with someone, I've never seen him show up to a meeting. I've never seen him show up to an event. I've never seen him show up to a press conference without bringing his own notes. Usually it's the reporters that bring notes. Richard's taking notes of the reporter.
Yeah. I mean, I think you as a reporter will know that how important, if you don't capture things, they go. You might remember.
I've even got mine with dividers, and I think I learned that from Richard.